Rick Talcott. Now, he's here on staff, and Rick has experience as a real estate developer, a home builder, and certified public accountant. Rick has served on a number of nonprofit boards, overseeing several building and expansion projects. In addition to the management of finance and accounting departments at Compass, Rick is active in providing leadership in several ministries throughout the church. Rick is married to Deborah and has 4 grown children and 10 grandchildren. 10? This is old, isn't it? 12 grandchildren. All right. Brandon needs to update. Where is Linda? Linda, where are you at? There you go. We need to update that. 12 grandchildren. All right. We don't need any staff conflict here, okay? Oh, fantastic. Well, I'm glad to have Rick with us. We're super glad to have you here, and we can't wait to see what tonight has in store. And on my left over here, we have Bob, and Bob has an accounting practice that serves individuals, small businesses, and corporate clients by providing tax planning and preparation, estate planning, bookkeeping, and financial statement preparation, business problem solving, including business sales and acquisitions. His accounting practice is located in Newport Beach, where Bob serves as managing partner of Gray, Proctor, and McManus, certified public accountants. Bob is married to Nancy, and they serve together. How many kids you guys have? 4. Whoa, we need to turn that on. Is this on right here? It is on. Try it out for me.
4 kids and 12 grandkids. Rick set the bar. I had to match it.
Wow. 4 kids and 12 grandkids? Yeah. And you have how many kids?
4 kids, 12 grandkids.
Wow.
CPA?
CPA?
Retired CPA.
Retired CPA. Wow, I feel like I'm just in between a mirror here. This is fantastic. Well, in case you guys...
We were separated at birth.
I was separated at birth. Perfect. So in case you guys are wondering, tonight we're going to do a finance Q&A. And so I have these 2 very well-qualified fellows up here. There was no way I was doing this one. So I invited these fellows up here. And here's how we want to do this. If you have a phone, I'm going to pop a number up on the screen. And if you have a question about finances, whether it's personal finances or something that you've had questions about in your life or things you may be struggling with now, you text your question to this number, and I will get it right here, and we will live answer your questions right here, right now. You ready for that? All right. But first, I do want to ask a particular question. Those who are here, they're single. You know, our people here were single. That means we have half the amount of money that a lot of our married counterparts have. And so the question that we all have is saving as a single. So what are some good practices, especially if we have kids here? A lot of our singles have kids. What is a good way to save as a single and as a single parent, knowing that it's a little bit more difficult in Orange County than maybe a married couple with kids?
Well, we know it's tough. You know, everybody starts out with not enough money all the time. The best advice I could give you is to, have a budget so you know what you're spending, and then just try to save as much as you can. There's one of the things, how many are on direct deposit with their employers, right? So one of the things you can do is you can go to your employer and say, I want most of my money to go into this checking account, but I want $25 a check to go into a savings account. Give them the ABA number and the account number, and then the check will automatically go into that savings account, and it's kind of like forced savings. And then just do your very, very best to live on what's left. But truly, when you talk about personal finance, whether you have plenty or you don't have enough, I always recommend that you start out with a budget. So you don't you don't spend more than you have. And budgets are great. A couple ways to budget. I know we were talking about that the other day. There's the super detailed budgets, and then there's almost a budget that I've just described. Make sure you're giving to the church, make sure you're saving, and then just live on what's left over. That's what I call the easy budgets. And if you put enough in savings and you can live on the rest, then that's great. The more detailed analysis, though, would tell you, well, how much am I spending on entertainment? How much am I spending on the car? How much am I spending on my rent? And then as soon as you know how much you're spending, then you can look to see where you can make adjustments so you can try to save more. But I like the idea of direct deposit. I mean, just start right there, a little bit at a time.
Yeah, the direct deposit's a great idea. Also, if you happen to have a retirement plan with your employer, there's usually a matching involved, and that's free money. And even if it's only 2% on matching on the retirement plan, take advantage of that. That's also will be your future retirement and savings account at the same time. And you can actually pull money out of a 401k, even to buy a house, and without paying any penalty on it or something like that. But there's some neat things that the employer can offer you doing it there. The other thing on budgeting, I've been a parent obviously, and you're always on the go, dropping kids off, transferring between here and there and everything else. And you tend to lean toward the convenient thing. And so, gee, we're stuck for time, I'm going to drive through In-N-Out Burger or something like that. And that can really eat into your budget quickly. So whatever you can do to remove the convenient part of this and plan ahead the best you can, or throw carrots and apple slices over the back seat to the kids in back yelling. I'm not sure how to solve it all the time, but anyway, convenient food is really costly on the budget.
I also think that when you do your tax return, if you have kids, there's child tax credits, and you can talk to Bob a lot more about that. There's earned income credits. If you get a refund that you weren't expecting, take a big chunk of that and put it in savings at that point. That only happens once a year, but then that would enable you to build up that savings account, over a longer period of time.
Just because I'm an accountant and I can run the numbers on this, if you take Starbucks out of your daily routine of $3.50 or whatever you're spending there every day, after a year you spent about almost $1,300. And if that money went into a savings account with a 5% return, at the end of 30 years, you would have $85,000. So now 5% return, Rick would probably say that's a little high.
It's a little high today.
We're getting a lot of questions about student loan debt and just debt retirement in general. So a good question that could answer a lot of these, and one is what are some good practices when it comes to canceling out debt? How much should I put towards debt a month, or what does that need to look like on a month-to-month basis?
I have two approaches to that. One is obviously you have to pay the minimum amount. And debt is awful. The interest rates that are charged on student loans after you've graduated are horrendous. There are some things that you can do to consolidate it and bring the interest rate down. But when it comes to debt, I always look at the highest interest rates that you're paying, and you want to pay down the higher rates first. And obviously, if you can throw more money at it at the same time. So then you get the balance. Am I saving? Am I paying my debt down faster? It's 6 and 12, half dozen sometimes, but when that 9% interest rate or 12% interest rate is eating up your money, it's probably better to service the debt before you do the savings.
So there's plan A over there with my colleague. He recommends paying, if you have a multiple number of cards, and the interest rate on one card is 20%, and the interest rate on the other one is 5%, pay down the 20% card first. And that's truly a valid option, Mr. McManus. I applaud you.
But obviously, we're going to hear the correct option next.
So there are others that would do the snowball method. How many have heard of the snowball method? Okay, so you've seen that. That's where if you have 5 different credit cards, you look at the one that has the lowest payment, and you pay it off as quickly as you possibly can. And then you go to the next one, and the next one, and the next one. So then, when the first one's gone, you don't have that one anymore. And you can it's a snowball effect. I've always gone with pay the highest interest rate one off, because if you assume you're going to pay them all off, you'll save some money in the end. But psychologically, when you start getting rid of one, you feel really good, and you can say, I can do this. And so then you go to the next one. And when that one's gone, you say, I got 2 out of the 5 done. And now you have more cash flow available because those 2 are gone, right? So whatever you were using to pay those off, now you have that money to pay off the ones other than just the minimum payment. So guys like Dave Ramsey that you hear about all the time, his program says do it that way. I just wanted to make you aware there's a couple different ways to do it. If you can, I would certainly pay off the high interest rate loans first, because why pay 20% on a credit card and leave a 5% interest rate on a credit card just sitting there? So kind of choose your poison, I guess, but I think in the long run, you've got to start tackling it. Otherwise, it's just going to grow, and even minimum payments sometimes, it's going to go up every month, and then you're paying interest on interest on interest. And the $85,000 you just talked about, sooner or later, you're going to find yourself, owing a lot of money on either personal cards or personal debt.
Fantastic. So we've talked a little bit about budgeting and paying off debt. Another area that I'm getting a few questions, and we'll sum it up like this. People want to know about giving. We kind of talk about this a lot in the church is giving and tithing. And a couple of the questions talk about as a single parent, what are my options to give? Or another question that came up was, I haven't been giving that much, but I want to get back on track. What are some good practices? Maybe, Bob, you want to take this one first. What are some good practices to be giving right now, even in the stage of life that they're in?
I'll take a stab at it, and Rick will correct me again. By the way, we work together a lot.
Not unless if you get it right, I won't.
Okay, first of all, in giving, God doesn't want your money. Okay, God wants your heart. So that's going to monitor where you start to give from. You have to feel it in your heart. And if you're not born again, this conversation is just going right over your head. Because if you're not saved, this means nothing to you at all. So Christ is first, and he is happy to see that you're going to give him the things that are close to your heart. And if it's him, you will give. Now, starting off, and Rick has much more exposure to helping couples start off on giving and counseling, marital counseling, and things like that. But it comes first. It comes first out of the paycheck. It can be $5, it could be $10, it could be $100, it may be 50 cents, but it needs to go first. And it's not after you bought the yogurt for the kids. It's not after, you bought that little thing. I'm gonna pick on the guys, that new pair of tennis shoes that you wanted to play at the gym or something like that. So, there's the tithing, there's 10% rule, and I think actually Pastor Mike has talked before that they would actually give about 25% in total if you went through all the giving tithings that they have.
In the Old Testament,
in the Old Testament, yeah. And we're relieved from the Old Testament in that part. So if you can give 100%, great. If you can give 2%, again, if you're serving God and you're serving him, you'll be happy to increase that. But it is a habit. It is something that you need to discipline yourself in. And what will happen is the more you give, the more you find that you're going to be fellowshipping with fellow Christians, because you want to make sure that your dollars are put to good work and spreading the good news and the programs that are being generated. And so, Rick, go ahead, fire away.
I think that's a great answer. So, oftentimes when I deal with people and I look at their budgets, they say, well, I have to have a cell phone, I have to have a computer, I have to have internet, I have to have a car, I have to have a place to live. And all of a sudden, all those crowd out the God that created you and loves you very much. And if you just have the paradigm shift of he's given you every dollar that comes into your bank account, there should be kind of a gratefulness in your heart to give some of it back. Now, maybe it's $5 a week, and you just say, yeah, I can't give any more. Well, then do $5 a week. Do it every week. Paul says he loves a cheerful giver. So you should be super happy that you're able just to give something back to him. And we're not a prosperity gospel place, so give us $1,000 tonight, and you'll get 10 times that in the future. But God does say you're going to reap what you sow. And so I would suggest if you're not doing something, also acknowledge there's certain times in your life where you might not be able to give much. But if that goes on for a long time, then I think you need to kind of sit back and say, how important is God to me? Because he gave you everything that you have. So even if it's a small amount right now while you're going through a really hard and tough time, remember, when things get better to kick that up. And that'd be my only suggestion.
That's good. I had a professor my freshman year. I went to a private school, and he said, if you have a hard time when you have a little bit of money giving a 10%, $1 out of 10, and you have a hard time giving that $1. Imagine how much more difficult it's going to be to give 10% of the 100, or 10% of the 1,000, or 10% of the 10,000. And he said, if you don't start now with the little that you have, you will never end up giving when you have an abundance. So he said, start that practice now in obedience to God so that you can be faithful to it when you are able to give more. So,
And the Word of God talks a lot about proportionality. So if you've been given a lot, there'll be a lot expected of you. And so, yeah, the 10%'s an Old Testament concept that we've talked about. It's nowhere in the New Testament. That's usually where I like to start with people. But I've known people that have very little money that they've just said, we're giving 25% of our income to the Lord. And I'm like, you're what? How are you even going to be able to do that? But they purposed in their life, that's what they're going to do. And you've heard the stories too. You're going through maybe harder times because you're single, but who knows? In 10 years, you may be the next Bill Gates, and then all of a sudden you got all kinds of money. And people have talked about, well, I gave 10% until I hit it big, and now I give 90%, and I just keep 10%, which, might not be enough for those people. That might not be a sacrifice because you never really know what other people make, right? So, yeah, I would just try to start somewhere. It's kind of like with the credit card debt. You need to start somewhere. But I would make it first. I would find a way to do it first. Yeah.
I just wanted to make a comment to what he said. 20 years ago when I became a realtor, we get paid and I have to pay my taxes. So I asked my dad, do I get the 10% off of what I net or what I gross? He goes, well, sweetheart, do you want net blessings or gross?
I like that answer. I get asked that all the time, and now I have a response.
we talked a little bit.
That's a harder decision to make when you're an independent contractor, right?
Yeah.
Because when I'm an employee, net and gross is an easier discussion because here's what I got paid and here's the taxes the government took out. Right. They could, but maybe we're getting more technical, but you might have $1 million worth of sales and $990,000 worth of costs, and you made $10,000. To give on gross, you can't even give on gross. And so somewhere that gets a little fuzzy on net and gross, but for most of us that just have a job, yeah, you want net blessings or you want gross blessings. I like that.
Or more deductions.
And here's a good question. This might be more for Bob. Tax season's coming, whether you like it or not.
Thanks for telling me.
Thank you. And so what are some good, some tips, some helpful tips to make sure that when we get into tax season and into the spring that we're not caught off guard and owing too much, we're not caught off guard with not understanding, what's going on in our tax situation? What are just some, basic helpful tips you could have?
Well, one thing is maybe a little late in the year to do this, but you should always check your withholding. Last year, there's a lot of tax law changes, last year being 2018. Okay, sorry, I live in the past. But what happened, the IRS made an error on the withholding tables. And by the time they corrected it, everybody was under withheld. And if you don't look at your paycheck and find out, well, why am I getting $30 more this week? You should look, because something's probably changed on your withholding. So it's a good idea to monitor your withholding throughout the year. And a good check and balance is, gee, if I had $5,000 in federal tax liability the year before, and I'm making maybe 10% more money, has it now grown to $5,500? So there's some eyeball things you can do when you check those. It's much easier for the W-2 people. And most people are self-employed. It's a little trickier because of the self-employment tax that comes into play. The other thing is, just for my benefit, don't wait till April 14th to put your stuff together. Why not prevent all the hassle, get it done early, calculate. I'd rather know sooner than later that I may owe. People think, oh, I'm going to owe. I don't want to do my tax return. Well, you got to do the tax return eventually. You can prepare it. You just don't have to file it yet. Okay, and there's some things you can do there. But, if you get it done in February, at least you have a few months to take care of that balance at that point.
So you're saying that extra little bit of money isn't God's extra blessing that I could be having?
You could. Yeah.
Right.
It could be.
It could.
Could be.
Oh, good. Those are good, helpful tips. Tax season can get a lot of us, especially with the laws that change every year. So it's great to be able to have people you can talk to.
The law hasn't changed this year.
Is it not changed this year?
Not much, right?
Good.
Yeah, fewer extensions.
Oh, goodness. All right, here's a great one. And I know Rick and I talked about this one a little bit in the past, but we're talking about a lot of you in here have kids, and so we have things. We have allowances. We want our kids to be smart with money, but we also want them to the relationship between chores and rewards. That was the rhyme. That was good. But what are some good, healthy practices, at least maybe in y'all's lives, that you could share with those that are here, helping your children be money smart and be good with their finances as they grow up. Rick, what are your thoughts?
Well, we did talk about this. We talked about allowances, and then we talked about chores that you require them to do, and the difference between those. And we always did allowances, but when we gave allowances, we said, okay, 10% has to go in the giving jar or the giving envelope. 10% has to go in the savings envelope. I should have had another one that said retirement envelope, but I didn't do that. But then the rest is for them, and I wanted them to learn how to manage their own money. And then they would find things that they would want, and they would save for it. And then, one kid would spend it as soon as he has it, and the other one would save for what he wanted. And then they got to argue with each other why one had something and the other didn't. And those are just great opportunities to help them to learn how to, handle money. And we never tied it to chores directly, because chores is just your obligation as a family member. Because you're part of the family, you do the dishes, you take out the trash, you help mom vacuum, we do the baseboards. Whatever it is we're doing, those are chores, and just by virtue of being a family member, you have to do those. And so we didn't take away allowances if they didn't do the chores. We had other ways of, taking care of not doing the chores. But my whole idea with allowances is to teach them how to manage money. And really, that's all, we ask you to do with some of the questions. How do I save? Put 10% in the savings jar, put 10% in your giving jar, and then make sure that you do that every time you get paid. And then I would just say there should be an entertainment envelope or jar or something for you, and only do entertainment, the Starbucks, the food, whatever you're doing, with what's in that envelope or that jar. So if you're gonna spend $100 in entertainment, then put $100 in at the beginning of the year and use that cash, and only use that cash to go and do entertainment, which is the same thing you're teaching your kid, how to handle money. Let's make sure we're handling money ourselves.
So you're saying we can have fun and save too?
You can.
Wow.
You don't have to spend money.
I'd add one thing to the the fund jar, and that's when kids are invited to birthday parties. That's where the present money comes from.
Yeah, that's absolutely.
Parents, you taking notes? It was, go ahead.
I have a question for Rick.
Ooh.
Ooh.
So, how do your children do today?
Well, are they listening to this? No, this is not live stream.
It is recorded. It'll be on YouTube.
Well, I don't know how to answer the question. How do they do on giving? They're I still do a couple of their tax returns. Is that what you're asking?
No, I'm just asking how have they financially, are they responsible? Have they learned the lessons you wanted them to learn?
So, I hate debt, right? And I don't think any of my kids are carrying any debt other than a mortgage. Debt's another question. Yeah. What kind of debt is good debt? No debt is good debt. But debt to buy a house, because it's normally an appreciating asset if you can afford it. I don't have any problem with that on a house. And I don't have problems with that on a car as long as you put a lot of money down on the front end and that you never get, quote, underwater, if you will, that you owe more than the asset is worth. But yeah, I think the process worked for my kids, but it isn't, that's because God wanted it to work. I mean, as parents, you try everything you can. And then you spend a lot of time on your knees and you pray that it will work out for them. And they don't have great highfalutin jobs either. I mean, 2 of them are teachers, and maybe some of you knew one of them was a missionary, and now they got no money. They're on welfare and just trying to make things work at the moment. And one is a bean counter, but he works for a nonprofit. So, they struggle month in and month out with the same issues that you do, and we all do at some point.
That's good.
Rick, you mentioned home debt and car debt, as long as you're not upside down. I read in the Wall Street Journal that 30% of 35-year-olds and under are upside down on their cars, which means they bought a car for 30, they traded it in for 10, and it still had a $25,000 debt on it, and they went out and bought another car on top of that. So, and I'll just let you know about automobiles. I have 230,000 miles on my car. Rick gets really tired of pushing it around, but it does make it to work most of the time. But look at what the things that you do buy, the larger items, what are they for? And we just saw Ferrari versus Ford last night. I want a fast car right now. I'm so excited about that.
I saw it too. I don't want a fast car.
You don't want a fast car.
Too much money.
But do look at the practical uses of it, and is it getting you from A to B? Is it safe? Wash it and shine it and smile when you drive.
And that's true for leasing cars. I've seen a lot of people, they get into a lease because they can't afford a down payment. And then 2 years later, the salesman calls and says, hey, have you seen the new models? We can roll your lease now into a new one, and it's only going to be another $50. And you do it, and then you do it again and again. And the next thing you know, you've got, a $500 a month lease payment on a car that you really should only be paying $200 or $300 a month. But we have a question in the back over here.
Yes.
Small.
Yeah, so
Right, so I would make them part of the allowance, and I would say 10% to God, 10% savings, 80% left. And you don't have to necessarily hand them the money, right? Because it's probably going to go on your credit card for the gaming fees. So if you're going to give them $50 a month or whatever your number is, then $40, how do you want to spend it? Do you want to spend it on gaming fees, or do you want to spend it on something else? And in that way, they're involved in making that decision. And then I would stay firm. But Mom, version 7 came out, and I really need to have it. You pull the chart out, and you say, well, yeah. So when you set the rules, I think you got to live. You got to live by them, right? And you can say, well, maybe at your birthday, Grandma's going to give you $50, and we can put that on that chart so you can keep the fees up.
So how much is he making, he or she?
Great. So that was a good chance to talk about idols in your life too. Like, what is really important? Why is it that these gaming fees have to go up and up and up? And maybe there's just an over interest in that, and you can ask him if God wants them to have an idol, and how much time does he spend, and you can start having decent conversations with them about how do we make priorities, how do we make decisions, And am I putting something ahead of what I shouldn't put ahead of? And you can tell them the parents have that same problem sometimes. They have to be careful. Is this an idol in your life? And if it is, God doesn't want us to have any idols in our lives. And he may think of that like, what did you say, Mom? I don't, idol? What's that? But someday he might look back on that and say, hey, that's what my mom was trying to teach me. And now I get it. Yeah. Yeah. I think you got to be firm.
And if you're listening online, the question was, how do you help your child manage spending, like online with gaming, software and gaming things online? And how, as a parent, do you help your child manage that well and keep them in a healthy balance between spending money online and as regard to their allowance and what the parents are allowing for that? A couple questions that are coming in.
I just want to make a comment to what he said. My son started, my grandson, his own ATM card. It was his money in the account. And it's funny because when he wanted a game, my son would say, okay, it's coming out of your money. Oh, I don't really need it that bad, Dad. So it's funny, his priorities changed when it was his money versus Mom and Dad's money. So, when it's coming off of his card, oh, I don't really need it that bad, Dad.
So there's a question right behind you as well.
Well, I was trying to figure out the envelope thing because I don't think kids know what money is today, cash. So,
Well, that's true.
Mom, give me
I
your
guess they
phone.
use charts now, right?
Yeah, so the question is credit cards for children, the small credit cards you can get for your children to help them manage money. Thoughts, guys?
If it's a credit card, I'm against it. They can put a debit card.
How old is the child?
Well, my grandson's 14, but it's not a credit card, it's a debit card.
Yeah. And how old were you thinking behind? 17.
Okay. I'd recommend you go down to the bank, co-sign for your daughter or son, okay? Their name will be on first, and that will and say we're going to borrow $1,000, and you're going to pay it back at $50 a month, okay? And so now he has credit, and that $1,000 is sitting in his drawer. You're not spending it on anything, and then you pay off that loan, and you'll develop credit that way. I'm not approval of giving a credit card. Credit cards don't teach the proper thing. So.
It makes me very nervous as well. But, the whole concept of I want them to have good credit. You want them to have good credit so they can get lots of credit cards on their own and run them up and not have any chance of ever paying them back. So I worry about that. I'm sure there's a management tool there somewhere. Deb, I'm trying to remember, I think with our youngest, we gave her a credit card. It was our credit card, but we put her name on it. And then we just looked at it all the time, and we made her come to us and tell us what she was spending on it. And so we controlled it, and if there was ever a problem, which there wasn't, you could yank it away, just immediately. And then that helps them build credit. But I had a friend of mine do the same thing, but he didn't watch it as close as he should. And the guy went off to college and started day trading in stocks using the credit card. And the next thing you know is there's a $10,000 credit card bill. So it's a little scary to me. I would rather not. And I know in our culture that's a hard thing to say, but I'd rather not let them play with that fire of credit because it's so easy. And you get them all the time. And when you go on college campuses, they like to give them away because they want to be your credit card for life, right? My first credit card was a Visa with Bank of America. And how many credit card options do you get? in the mail all the time. And they'll be getting the same things. So they're going to have to learn how to manage it on their own. But I would rather do it through the allowance process, or like Bob said, although, can you walk down to a bank and do that anymore?
You can try.
You can try. Most of it's online stuff these days, but.
No, I agree with Rick. And maybe the credit card thing would be later in the college years, later on, because they do need credit eventually. They're going to be buying that first used car. That's a great time. And if you have nothing, parents are going to be co-signing for that anyway. So that might be a way to get into the credit world for them. But there are those big ticket items, and we can't pay cash for everything, but we just got to make sure we don't get overextended on that debt. So if I have a $300 car payment, I'm making $1,000 a month at that time or something like that.
Good. Remember, if you have questions, text in, mostly so we can make sure that online they hear the question and the answer. One of the questions, two questions that kind of they want the same kind of answer. We're talking about wills. And no one really wants to think about a will. You know, what happens after you die? Where does my stuff go? But even if you're just a young single, or if you're a single parent, wills are important. What's some good advice, some good principles for making sure your will is prepared if the unfortunate tragedy happens?
Well, after tonight's sermon, it's all going to happen to us. We'll all die. A will is very important, and one is if something was to happen to both parents, who would then be the conservator or the godparents for that child too. So, that's never expected to be done. So a simple will would be helpful. And then there's always estate issues also. So when mom and dad pass away, the assets are going to be probated. And so to avoid that, if you had a trust set up and everything was in the name of the trust, the assets would transfer much quicker, and then being held up in probate for, it could be 18 months, could be longer.
So this is when I say something like, do you want to decide who's going to care for your children? Or do you want the state of California to decide who's going to care for your children? Because if you don't do it, then the state's going to come in. And the state doesn't really care about your religious beliefs, whether you want a believing family to raise your kids. They're going to go to next of kin or somebody that walks up and says, I'm willing to do it. So if you have children, I think you need to get a will. You need to get it done as soon as you can. Now, there's ways to do that, right? What's the most cost-effective way to do that?
I think an attorney is the most cost-effective way, but are you talking about LegalZoom or something?
So
you can write a will and mail it to yourself?
There's various ways to do a will, right? A lawyer is the best, but it's going to cost money, and if you guys are struggling month to month, that's pretty tough. You can go online and find the forms, and usually, none of us are lawyers. We can't give legal advice, so what we're saying now are just some different ways to do it. If you don't think there's going to be a big fight about it, then you can go find a form, fill it out, sign it, and that would work for a while.
Yeah, something's better than nothing.
Something's absolutely better than nothing. But if you think, well, my sister wants the kids, and my brother wants the kids, and I don't want the kids to go to my mom, and I think if we were to fight for a minute, if there would be a disagreement about what would happen, then spend the $800 or $900, find a lawyer, and have them do a will, and then try to make sure that they don't overcomplicate the process. Okay, so they'll start asking you, well, okay, if you were to die tomorrow, when did you want your children to get all of your assets? And you might say to them, I don't have any, so I don't care.
Just debt.
But they'll try to. Yeah, they don't inherit your debt, by the way. The debt goes away. But they'll want to talk to you about, well, what if they're married? And what if they're married with children? And what if they're married but their spouse dies and they don't have children? I mean, they can make it so complicated, you would get very frustrated. So the easier you make it, I think you can walk in and say, this is what I want to do. I want to make sure my children are cared for by this person or that person. If you have a net worth of more than $11.3 million, then you need to have a trust.
That's all of us, right?
Actually, actually it's 11.9.
I'm sorry, 11.9.
Shots fired.
You guys are good over here.
The other reason is, as Bob mentioned, though, if you were to pass away, it's so much easier to do it if you have a trust and not a will. Trusts are going to run you anywhere from $1,500 to $3,500. And again, I don't know how that fits in your budget, but you can do, if you just do a will, if you have children, I would say we've accomplished a lot. If we could just
Definitely
get that
children
done.
under 18 get something in writing.
That's good. Here's something that, especially if you're younger, you really don't want to talk about this, but the impact that it has over your life is significant, and that is retirement, saving for retirement. Talk about that and the necessity of saving. The younger you are, the better. And maybe go from both sides. One of you talk about the younger side, like saving as a young person, and one of you talk about saving, 50 plus. Give us some advice about that. Rick, you want to take the younger one?
No.
No.
That means I have the right answer.
Well, you said, use the guy with the calculator. He could tell you if you put $100 a month away when you're 65, you're going to have so much money. It's insane. But how does that work, really?
How does it work? Well, obviously, the younger you are, the easier it is to get to your retirement account. But I've read several quick numbers on how to get to that number. And so you kind of sit down and say, well, how much would we be spending in retirement? So, well, Nance and I, hopefully we won't have a mortgage at that time. So that's out the window. But some of you may be renting and not renting when you go to retire. But let's say you sit down, okay, I want to travel. All my surf spots I want to go to, but we're not going to do that together, are we, honey? No. So you make a budget as if you're 30 years from now and multiply that by 35. So that's kind of the number you're looking at when you get there. So when you do play with the numbers, and I'm not good at that, very good without a 10 key, if you know what a 10 key is. But putting in those dollars as you go along, they need to be invested. Usually they're some type of mutual fund type investment, something relatively conservative because you want it to go up steadily but not go backwards very quickly. And other than that, as every decade goes by, it's just that much more you have to start putting in. But I can tell you, though, once you start to become empty nesters and those kids are no longer playing video games and they're out the door. By the way, I have a client that makes about $200,000 a year playing video games, so maybe he has a goal. But anyway, so as you get later in life, if you're locked in on maybe your car payments are done and you just don't have the education costs for the kids and going to college, because there's some years in there that you're spending a lot of money on children. And even if you get help, it's a lot of money when they're away and they're not producing much money themselves. And hopefully, my kids, I was able to get them to work some during college, which was great. But my goal was to get them out of college as fast as I could because it was more economical to do that. But so I think your retirement dollars are going to increase greatly when you start hitting the 40-plus years. And Rick might be able to attest to that some. If you have weddings involved and that child that saved all their money didn't pitch in like they should have with their allowance, but anyway, that's my 2 cents.
So all I would add to that is, you may be sitting there and saying, come on, man, I can't even make it month to month. How am I ever going to start putting money away for retirement? And I go back to the same thing. If you happen to get a raise in a year and you found yourself with an extra $100, put it in your retirement. And most employers will match that. And as Bob said earlier, that's free money. And so I would highly recommend that if your employer has a retirement plan where you can put money in and they'll match it, try to figure out a way to do that. Because the longer you do that, the more money you'll have at the end of the day. And then the other observation I would make is if you're older, you need to be more conservative with how that money's invested. Most retirement plans are 401ks or 403bs, where whatever you put in is matched, and then you get to decide how it's invested. That's why you said a mutual fund. When you're younger, I think you can be more aggressive on the investments that you make because you have another 45 or 50 years to put money in that retirement
To make up
account.
for your mistakes?
To make up for your mistakes. And again, that's what, I don't know who the experts are, but they say be more risky when you're younger because you got 40 years to make it up. If you're my age and Bob's age, maybe we shouldn't be quite as risky.
We
because
can't
we
fund
don't
it
have
fast
40
enough.
years to work to make it up. So, there's a lot of, and this gets confusing because when you actually open a retirement account, they're going to say, okay, well, here's 15 different choices to invest your money, and you're going to have to decide where to put it. And some of them have what they're called date-targeted funds, and they look at when you're going to retire, and they'll take care of some of this for you. They'll be a little more aggressive on the early years, and then they'll be a lot more conservative as you get older. So that's the process. If you are older, the tax law allows you to catch up as if if you didn't make contributions like you should have. The tax law will allow you to do more when you hit 50. And so you should take advantage of that if you can. Whether they're in IRAs, you can make individual retirement accounts if you're not covered by a plan at your employer. But I would do something, and I would start looking at my annual increases. If I have enough savings elsewhere, I would start opening that retirement account. And it's never too late, right? You would love to do it when you were 20, and you get 45 years of contributions. You'll have a lot of extra money to supplement your Social Security. But if you're sitting there at 35 or 40 or 45 and say, I haven't done anything, it's never too late to start. I would just encourage you to start as soon as you can.
I've never had a client complain about starting retirement too early. The other thing is, that money's out of your paycheck. You really don't think about it, and don't look at it every day. Look at it every quarter. Just move on with life, and you'll be excited one day. You'll forget if you even have one, maybe. I don't know, and you open it up, and woo, we're
Isn't
good
that
to
what
go.
I told you?
Yeah, that's exactly what
exactly
Rick
what I
told
told
me. I told him I look at it and I just get upset and
Told him stop looking at it.
he told me to stop. So what did I do? I looked at it twice. But now I stopped. Okay. Here's a good question. Somebody texted in. We heard how Rick's kids came out, but how did Bob's kids come out?
My kids and Rick's kids are very similar, and they're doing very well. They're married to Christian women. They have all attend church. They have great congregations. Financially, they are very prudent. I'm just got back from Oklahoma working with my son, and they do a phenomenal job budgeting and looking at options for when it comes to spending cash. And their kids are having a ball. You can never tell that they're short a dime or need an extra quarter. But they're just, they're figuring it all out. My Indiana kids are doing great, teaching at church and paying down their mortgage payment faster than, well, it's Indiana. The house costs $10,000, I think.
10 grand? Is that what he said?
Somebody fact check
It's probably
that
a couple
for me.
hundred. It's more expensive than Texas.
I think that
We
was...
were to watch it.
No, but I think what Bob said is important. Often you want things for your kids, right? What kind of house did you live in when you were 7? Wasn't it the greatest house you ever had? Right? And you went down to the park that was the biggest park in the world, and now you drive by and it's like, oh, that's a dinky little park. But kids are resilient. They don't care. You go to the thrift store and buy them a shirt. They're happy with the thrift store shirt. One of my grown kids still wears a thrift store shirt that he bought that he loves. So, Nancy wants to weigh in on something. I saw her hand up there.
I was going to say that, but Rick cut me off.
I yield the floor to the fine gentleman from Lake Forest.
My youngest daughter, that saved all her allowance, okay, they just moved into an apartment that all 3 kids, and the oldest is, help me out, Nance, 6. Okay, so all 3 kids, 6 and under, are sleeping in the same room so they can save money. All right, and do it. And you know what? They got a great park right down the street.
Plus, there's great things when they have to share a room. I mean, we made our kids share a room for a while, and there's some interpersonal things that help. They get closer. They learn to live together with kindness and compassion.
Here's a quick question. This is especially if if you have kids.
Are you making these up, or are these like legit questions?
No, hey, I've answered some. We've talked about some of your questions, right?
Okay.
I just needed some financial advice myself, so I put together this whole thing so I could get some advice because I'm struggling.
Buy low and sell high.
But
Stop looking at your 401k, 403b.
oh goodness! All right, what did we talk about life insurance?
No, we did not.
We did not. Okay, that's a good question. Life insurance. I'm not the best example of this, but when you have people you're taking care of, what's the necessity of having a good amount of life insurance for you, no matter how old you are?
Rick again thinks he has the right answer. Okay, first of all, term insurance is what you want to look at. Okay, I'm not an insurance guy, but you have to look at why you're buying the insurance. And by the way, this term insurance ends after a certain date. Okay, maybe a 10-year or 20-year period of time. But you say, look, if I got 3 kids and they're under 18 right now, my goal is to put them through college, and I have maybe some money saved up and no money saved up, and I know that they're going to go to, Aunt Betty and Uncle Joe to take care of them. That's the number you'll probably be looking at for that policy if that's what they're going to do. But college is one way, trade schools. But to have Uncle Joe and Aunt Betty take care of your 4 kids with no money, it's going to be a tough haul. So term insurance is pretty economical, and I look at it that way. Insurance, I don't want to be dead, but at this point, but that's what I want to make sure that my kids have some financial stability. And maybe it doesn't have to be, maybe it can only be a $120,000 policy or something like that. Rick might have some other points later on. For instance, I have life insurance because I do want my mortgage paid off. And that's about all I have left. No one wants my car with 240,000 miles on it. But other than that, I use it for that. Some people use it for the state tax purposes, but I don't think we're there on the $11.9 million today.
Yeah, what I usually do is if you have children, I think you need insurance. If you don't, then I wouldn't spend money on it. I'd spend money in other areas. At least depending on your age and mortgage and houses and things like that. But then if I'm talking to a couple and they have a couple kids, then I say, okay, if the wife dies, and these are hard questions to have, how long do you want the husband to mourn? Right? Do you want him to be able to go a year or 2 years while he figures out life? Because he's going to mourn upon the death. Any spouse is going to mourn on the death of the other spouse. And they probably can't work because they can't focus on work because they're wondering, how am I ever going to make it in life? So then I go back to your budget and say, if you're spending $60,000 a year and you have a couple kids, maybe it's 3 years that you want to be able just to sit back and say, I'm not going to worry about, I don't want the spouse that survives me to worry about money for 3 years. So what's the number? You can calculate that number. If you want to add in college. But as you add money in every time, those premiums are going to go up. But I agree with Bob, term life insurance only. And then I'd say, how long do you want the person to live, and how much money do you want? Now, life insurance is not taxable. That's a great thing about life insurance. You get $150,000, you don't pay tax on that. So now you have that money to care for the spouse or the kids that have died. If you're a single mom or single dad and you're taking care of kids, same thing. Who's going to care for these kids if I die? And you want to have enough money that they'll have that goes to the guardians for control until they're 18. That's what you put in your will. Maybe it's more complicated, but you want to provide enough money that they can live for a while. That's the whole idea about life insurance, is provide enough money for how many years, and you can work that formula out. And the younger you are, the cheaper it is. It's very inexpensive for young people. The older you get, it starts costing more because you're closer to that point of death.
They know it's coming.
After tonight, we're reminded it's coming for all of us sooner than we think.
That's right. Well, we are out of time. Can you guys thank Bob and Rick for coming out here and answering our questions? Thank you, guys.